So the transportation system of the future, this is something we've been thinking about for as long as we've been traveling, always imagining things being faster, more convenient. But what does that future transportation system look like to you? Well, you might think about the current system, places you travel frequently that frustrate you. Maybe there's that section of road where you've thought, if only they would make the road a little bit wider, add another lane, make the green light just a little bit longer for me, things would work so much better. Well, your view as a traveler is often through the windshield of your vehicle, or maybe from the seat of your bicycle, looking out at all those things that get in your way. Well, as a transportation engineer, my view is a little bit different. I'm looking up above, down at everybody traveling, trying to figure out where everybody wants to go. And if I made that road a little bit wider, I might just be funneling you to a bigger bottleneck downstream. Or if I make the green light longer for you, I'm making the red light longer for somebody else, maybe doing backups in that other direction. So what happens is this cycle where travelers express their frustration, transportation engineers do listen. We go back to our offices, we run our models, we look at the available resources that we have and the time that we have to construct things, and we come back with solutions that don't feel that satisfying most of the time. So it's no wonder that people are always looking to the future for something better. Well, to understand our transportation system, we actually have to think about it through time. So let's walk back in time and think about the roads that we're using now. They were often developed first as footpaths, maybe bridle trails, making way for carriages, wagons, eventually bicycles, tramways, and then finally the automobile. Each of these ways of traveling requires something different from their roads, different widths. So take, for instance, tramways. They're really limited by the grade, the type of hill that they can climb, right? So when they encounter significant hills, they have to zigzag their way up or go diagonally to get to the top of the hill. So here in Spokane, we had a really extensive tramway system. This map, the green line showing the tramways in 1929, extending all the way in the north to Franklin Park and down in the south to 37th Avenue. So, when it encountered in the southern part, the South Hill, it had to zigzag its way up to get through. Well, this was in 1929, which was the maximum extent of the tramway system. And just 7 years later, that tramway system was gone, and that space taken over by the increasing number of automobiles. But many of you who live in Spokane could be driving those roads today and wonder, what in the world were they thinking, right? But, so we're left with these cities that are adapting to new ways of travel over time. Well, as Spokane got larger, the outer areas were developed around automobiles. So those streets are often straighter and wider, and they carry a lot of traffic just to get you to the bottlenecks at the central city. Right? These older roads we often can't replace due to funding constraints, but also we don't often want to replace them because this is where a lot of our history and character of our older cities reside. So as transportation engineers, we're constantly adapting to these new ways of travel, always trying to look to the future to figure out what people are going to be doing. Sometimes the way that we travel happens really quickly. Take companies like Uber and Lyft. In just the last 5 years, they've risen to pretty strong prominence in our cities, giving people more mobility than they had before, allowing some people to forego the cost of owning an automobile. But at the same time, they're taking trips away from trips that would have been done by walking, biking, or taking the bus. Other times we see technology coming that we know is going to make a large impact, but it never really takes off. So now we're left with what's coming? What is this future of transportation? Well, you've probably been hearing a lot about self-driving or autonomous cars, right? These are vehicles where the driving maneuvers and driving decisions are done by your vehicle's technology as opposed to human drivers. This might be something that you've thought, I really want to go out and buy one of those, thinking of all the things, I'm not sure what to do about that, but all the things that you could be doing instead of driving. Maybe reading a book, the newspaper, legally sending texts and emails. Or maybe you've looked at that technology and thought that it was something that you didn't really need, right? Something you weren't willing to pay extra money for. That's all coming out. Regardless of your personal thoughts on the technology, obviously an engineer and not an actor here. So regardless of your personal thoughts on this technology, it's coming, right? If you think about private companies that rely on transportation for their businesses, maybe in industry or farmers who need to get their goods to market, or companies like Uber and Lyft whose ability to expand their system is limited by the number of drivers they can recruit, right? These companies are willing to be early adopters of this technology, and that reduces the price for all of us. As we buy new cars in the future, that technology will be in those vehicles. Now we have to decide how we're going to use them. So what would you do differently if you had a self-driving car? Would you send the car out to go pick up your kids from soccer? Without you? Okay, I think does that work if I just let it lay there? Obviously, it's not staying in my ear. Would you send the car out and then maybe go out on your own shopping trip later, where those two trips used to be combined, right? If you had a meeting downtown, would you just have the car, instead of paying for parking, would you just have the car go around the block until your meeting was over? Maybe sending that car back so somebody else in your household could make a trip, right? So the technology has the impact, right, of making things considerably different. So is it a good impact or a bad? Well, certainly we have to think about the people who make their living as drivers now. Those jobs will be gone. But maybe there's some opportunities as well. So maybe we could take those parking spots, all those surface parking lots, and turn them into open space. Maybe we could take the parking garages and convert them into affordable housing or new businesses. There are lots of challenges and there's lots of opportunities with this technology, but I think how we address these as a region requires us maybe to think a little bit differently about transportation. So back to our view. So instead of thinking about just all the impediments in your way as you're driving down the road, maybe think a little bit more about why you're in the car in the first place. What influences the number of trips that you make? Is it where you live, where you work, where you play, right? So one thing to think about, or an example of it, is driving our kids to school. This is something 20, 30 years ago was relatively rare, but now is commonplace. Why are we driving our kids to school? Is it because the school was built too far away from our neighborhood? Or maybe there's a street between us, our house, and the school that doesn't feel safe having our kids cross. Or what about shopping? Our stores have gotten really, really large. While they may be good for choice and price, it also means that we can't walk, bike, or send our kids out to buy a gallon of milk. The way our communities are developed are intrinsically linked to our transportation system, yet we've always sort of fundamentally viewed them as two separate systems. I know how we travel in 10 years from now will be different than the way we're traveling now. The technology that's coming is just too great for it to be otherwise. But I think we have to, as a region, start talking about the communities and how we want to live, and start viewing the technology that's coming as opportunities for developing those communities. Let's not just incrementally change our transportation system and be continued to be frustrated with the outcome. Instead, let's think about the communities that support the way we want to live and using that technology to build those communities. And then I think finally, we can have the transportation system of the future that we've been dreaming of. Thank you.